The Comstock lode was, again, this incredible concentration of wealth, and the ore bodies were wider than anything anybody had ever known. And when they got down on the first shallow ore body in the early 1860s, it was 60 feet across, right? And they didn't know how to get that out of the ground. You can't like build traditional post and cap timbering won't support that. It'll support about 10 feet high and about 20 feet wide, and anything bigger than that, and it starts to cave in on itself. And that started the very ironic problem of being surrounded by more wealth than you can imagine and being unable to get it out of the ground. And anytime you tried to open a big void in that ore body, it would collapse in on itself and kill people, right? So they had to solve this really difficult engineering problem, and a German mining engineer did solve it, a guy named by the name of Dietesheimer. And he invented what's called square set timbering, and it's the Comstock lode's great contribution to mining technique with an immense cost, which I will tell you about later, which you are all still aware of, although you don't know it. It was based on beehives. So you build a little cube frame of stout timbers, 1 foot on a side and 7 feet high, 4 feet across the top. So you essentially build a coffin of 1 foot timbers around you, and then you frame that up, and then you build another one next to you in that void, and so on. So you fill the void with these cubes of timber, and it turns out that a huge advantage is you can expand that void in all directions at once now. So it's also, it greatly accelerates the mining. The cost is the immense amount of timber that it takes to do that, and the immense expense of that. If most of us have been to Lake Tahoe, you will look really hard to find a tree that's older than the 1870s in the Tahoe Basin, because all of those trees went down the Comstock mines. Hundreds of millions of feet of timber shoring those mines, and because there's no coal in the West, or it hadn't been discovered in Wyoming yet, they used it to fire the boilers. So the environmental cost is tremendous of this style of mining, and only such staggering wealth could make it possible. To get those trees out of the Lake Tahoe Basin, they built these lumber flumes, just like the things that you go at the old amusement parks where you get in the log and then shoot down the flume in the water. Those are invented as amusement park rides based on these ones that were shot out of the mountains behind Lake Tahoe, where they diverted entire streams into these flumes. Sometimes they'd be on bridges like 100 feet over the canyons, and then they would shoot the logs in these, and then they would go down to Carson City, where there was a railroad spur, and they'd put them up on the trains and then take them up the Virginia and Truckee Railroad to Virginia City. And they made flume boats. So they would haul out logs, and you could jump in that thing and whoosh down, and they would be going like 70 or 80 miles an hour down those things, and it was death-defying, as you might imagine, in the 1870s without a single safety device around. And those were probably the people traveling the fastest in the world at that time, the people riding the lumber flumes down. Anyway, and another big environmental cost was the mercury that they used to mill the ore. They mixed it up, and then you smash the ore, pulverize it, mix it up in these huge amalgamating pans, retort out the amalgam, the gold and silver and the mercury mix, retort off the mercury, and you're left with the slug of gold and silver, except you lose some of the mercury and some of the gold and silver in this process, and that's why you wouldn't want to eat a trout out of the lower reaches of the Carson River, because thousands of tons of mercury are now lining the floor of that river.